Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Truergy, also known as Byron of Sidious. This is American Minotaur, written by yours truly, Joshua T. Calkins Truergy. Chapter 17. The sight of the police cruisers parked in front of his home put Titus's mind into a panic. But the moment he got out of his truck, he spotted his mom and dad standing on the porch with an officer, and he slowed his approach up the front walk, leaving his duffel in the cab of his truck. The officer with his parents gave him a look, and John Jacobson said, "It's all right, officer. That's our son." The officer did a quick double take, a younger cop who Titus didn't recognize from around town. "I know. The resemblance is positively uncanny," Titus quipped, nudging past the cop and hugging his mom. "So, probably the same people who've been snatching from the folks out of town up and down the street, huh?" he asked, pulling away gently. "Probably so, yes. I'm so sorry, honey. They probably took your game system, too. You should head up and check so you can tell the officers." Titus nodded, headed into the house, and went right for the front hall closet, slipping his hoof caps on. From there, he headed down the hall to the stairs, then up to his room, his pace slow, eyeballing the floorboards carefully. Something seemed out of place as he made his way along, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it yet. "Of course something's out of place. Your home was broken into, Captain Obvious," he chided himself. When he got to his room, Titus let out a low grumble, seeing that the thief, or thieves, plural, had indeed taken his PS5, as well as his cords and controller. But did they look carefully?" he muttered to himself, opening his narrow closet and letting out a sigh of momentary relief. His Nintendo Switch still sat on the shelf above his hung clothes, a small Sterilite box holding the few games that he had for the unit within. Something else was troubling him, though, and though he could not have said why, he decided to duck down and look under his bed. The box with the blasting rod sat there, and he pulled it out, opening the hinged lid and looking down at the magical weapon. Everything seemed just as it had before, which offered its own sort of relief. If he lost it before Ashkar could ask for it back, he would be carrying that guilt around for a while, quite likely. He closed the lid and slid it back into its hiding spot. No sooner had he stood up than there was a knock on the doorframe, and he saw the second officer standing there, a slimmer figure being blocked by the cop. "They take anything from your room here, son?" the officer asked, a notepad and pen in hand. "Just my PS5 and controller and games," Titus replied. He hooked a thumb over his shoulder to his computer desk, on which still stood his desktop rig. "They probably figured my computer was too bulky to make off with. Hey, could you let her by?" The cop looked back, excused himself to leave the room, and Misha darted in and wrapped herself as best she could around the big Minotaur. Titus woofed a little air, then returned the hug, patting her on the head. "Hey, it's all right, Mish. They didn't take anything important. I would have thought that you already took off home when you guys got back." "I did, but then your mom messaged me shortly after we got in the house," the half-elf girl said, pulling away from Titus until she had her hands on his wrists, hanging on lightly. "It was all I could do to tell my own parents to stay home, in case the creeps are still in the neighborhood." She shook her head, looking down. You'd think people could just let everyone have something nice like Christmas, but here we are. Titus nodded, drawing back from Misha a moment, and he held up one finger. "Well, it's not all bad," the young Minotaur said, stepping over to his dresser and sliding the top drawer open. "I was gonna wait until closer to Christmas to give you this, but when something like this happens, it makes you reconsider letting things wait," he said, taking out the gift-wrapped little jewelry box. He turned around and offered it up to her. Misha smiled, took the box, and unwrapped it, handing him the paper, which he took to the little trash can next to his computer desk. She opened the box and stared wide-eyed down at the necklace, its emerald inset glimmering. Misha gently pulled the necklace out with one hand, clapping the box shut and stuffing it in her coat pocket. She then held it out toward Titus. "Do you want to—" she began. "Oh, yeah, right." Titus stepped toward her and took either end, waiting until she turned around, then draped it over her head, waiting until she pulled her ponytail up out of the way to secure it around her neck. There's a lot of ladies these days who don't go in for birthstones, it seems, but I know how you like to buck the current trend, so I thought you might like it. Misha turned around, fiddling with the gemstone a little, then looked up firmly at him. "Mish, you okay? You look like you're gonna cry, hon." Misha Turkin hadn't been able to think of the words to say, had been trying to formulate them since the Halloween party, really. But she was an illusionist, and the wisdom of her art form, one that holds true for any storyteller, ripped through her mind in that moment. Show, don't tell. She shot her hands up around Titus's neck, pulled his head down, and planted her lips against his firmly but warmly, cradling the back of his neck and head gently in her hands. When she finally pulled her head back, he was giving her an almost half-drunken grin. "I love you too," was all he had to say. "Jonathan Jacobson, don't," Linda said, the faintest smile on her face as she put a hand on his shoulder at the base of the stairs. "Let's just you and I head on into the living room, thank the Lord that nothing important was stolen from us, and let those two have some privacy." John trusted to his wife's wisdom, and together they headed out to the living room and sat together on the couch, turning on the television and scrolling through their Netflix options. When John had picked out a movie for them to watch together, Linda added, "Just maybe turn the volume up a little more than usual, for good measure." When morning dawned, Titus winced at the thin blade of sunlight piercing through his window into his eye. Normally, he might have rolled away against the wall, but unless he wanted to crush Misha into the mattress, that wasn't an option this time. Instead, he used his right arm to shield his eyes, his left hand tingling slightly as the half-elf girl groaned and stretched, her head still nestled in the crook of his arm and shoulder. He brought his left hand up to gently squeeze her shoulder, covered in his lightweight fleece blanket bearing the Buffalo Bills colors and logo, and planted a light peck on her forehead. "Morning, Mish." Morning. Do we have to move right now? I'm comfy." "Well, at the very least, you can hang here in bed a minute, but my bladder's telling me that I can't well stay where I'm at unless I want the worst start to my day that I've had in a while." She snapped her eyes open with a grin and gave him a quick kiss before he rolled out of the bed, hoisted up his loose gray sweatpants, slipped on his hoof caps, and shuffled his way down the upstairs hallway to the second-floor bathroom. After making his morning necessary, Titus slipped out, snickering as he found Misha standing in the hallway, wrapped up in his blanket. "Let me scooch out of your way there, dear." "Hey," she said as he passed by her. She hooked a finger into the waistband of his sweats. "I'll be back in a minute. Go ahead and put those back on the floor for when I get back." Now, good reader or listener, if you're familiar at all with the works of the fellow telling this tale, you know that said storyteller has only a couple of times indulged in getting graphic about situations such as the one that unfolded when Misha did return to Titus's bedroom over the course of the tales that he's told. This will not be another entry into those rare instances, but surely you've got enough imagination available to figure out what happened, right? Quite well, then. Moving along. "Well," Misha rasped afterward, catching her breath. "That's a good way to start the day." She sat up, leaning over the side of the bed to fetch her trousers and jersey, pulling them on as Titus also got himself dressed. He heard Misha sniffing behind him, turned to look at her. Your mother's making breakfast, isn't she? Sunday morning ritual, yup. Do you think your folks heard us? Dear, I think the neighbors probably heard us. Let's not worry about that. Come on, let's go downstairs and recharge, he said, holding his hand out to her. As they started down the upstairs hallway together, hand in hand, Titus came up short at the top of the stairs, scowling down at the bare wooden steps. Tea? What is it? Wait. Come with me, he said, leading her back toward his bedroom. Honey, I'm flattered, but I don't think I have it in me, she started, at which he issued a short snicker. Not that, Mish. I want to see something. He led her back toward the bed, letting go of her hand and crouching down beside it, pulling out the hinged black box with the blast rod inside. Mish, what do you see here? He asked, opening the lid. The half-elf illusionist peered down into the box, quirking a confused expression up at him. Well, it looks like a blasting rod. The sort my father says that a lot of constables and law enforcers back in his homelands used to use if they weren't natural magic users. She plucked the rod out of the box, turning it this way and that, then set it back in. It's not a bad replica, but yeah, that's not the real thing. Why? Ashkar pulled his car up in front of the Jacobson house that Wednesday, a couple of weeks out from Christmas. Titus's invitation to a lunch at his house, as opposed to at Denny's again, was a pleasant one to get, seemingly out of the blue. The Minotaur fully expected Titus's female caregiver had asked him to extend the invitation, likely so that she could further invite him to come to their home for Christmas. She struck him genuinely as just the sort of person to be that welcoming. He was a little surprised to find that he wasn't the only visitor, though. Titus's friends, the one with the dark green Jeep who seemed like some kind of biker sort, and the half-elf girl with the ridiculous panel van, were also parked in the driveway, along with John Jacobson's truck and Linda's tiny sedan. Full house, Ashkar thought, making his way up the front walk. He was almost to the bottom of the steps when the half-elf girl stepped outside, a cigarette jutting from her lips. Oh, Mr. Sutek, good timing, she said, lighting the cigarette. Linda's just about ready to plate out lunch, and I think Titus wants to tell us all his announcement after we eat. Announcement? He didn't say anything about that in his message this morning, Ashkar remarked, his head swimming with possibilities. Was the boy going to finally tell them that he was going to announce for the NFL draft? Thank the gods. He'll make a killing wherever he lands, Ashkar thought. He only mentioned it about 10-15 minutes ago. I think that's why he asked us all over, though. You can head in. I just ducked out for a quick smoke before we eat. Ashkar nodded to her and then passed to the front door, heading into the front hallway of the Jacobson home. That was pretty quick, Misha, Tarian Turkin called from the living room. It's not her, it's Ashkar, the older Minotaur called out, wiping his hoofs of the snow that he had slogged through on the front walk up to the house. Ah, we're in the living room, called Titus in response. Ashkar unzipped his coat and moseyed toward the living room, taking a full step in before he stopped himself moving at all. Seated on the couch, slightly to Ashkar's right, were the half-elf girl's parents. In the armchair, Linda Jacobson. Standing behind her, one hand on her shoulder, which she held, John Jacobson. To the left side of the room, standing in front of the television and entertainment center, were Titus's biker-looking friend Henry, and a pair of figures he had not thought to see again anytime soon. Chona, the local shaman in waiting, and his father, the area's current shaman. In the center of the living room, the short coffee table had been turned longwise between the couch and the television, the central surface hosting 2 items. On the left, the hinged wooden box with the replica blasting rod within. On the right, a translucent pair of hoof caps. And standing directly opposite Ashkar Sutek, behind the coffee table, glaring daggers at him with his arms folded over his chest, was Titus Jacobson, his own flesh and blood. Every criminal, no matter how clever they are, or how lucky, always eventually makes a mistake, Titus rumbled at him. He thrust a stiff finger down toward the hoof caps on the coffee table. I never forget to put mine on when I come home, or when I come downstairs in the morning. I suspect you don't even own a pair to have worn yourself, Ashkar. The Chaldean native dragged his back foot up next to the other one, hands on his hips, looking down at the floor. His only clear thought was, I'm fucked. As for the blasting rod, let me ask you this. Did it ever actually belong to the woman who gave birth to me? No, Ashkar admitted, shaking his head. O'Connell sent me up to Boston months ago to buy it for him at a kind of backroom silent auction. But let me explain, he stammered, looking up. I want no explanation, Titus snapped, jabbing the finger he had pointed at the hoof caps now up at his birth father. The front door of the house opened behind Ashkar, and he watched as the half-elf girl made her way into the room, slipping easily by him on the side and walking over to stand beside the larger, younger Minotaur. What I want, Ashkar, is for you to never again darken my doorstep, no matter where I reside. Chona stamped one of his thick legs on the floor, drawing all eyes in the room to himself. His father then copied the motion, and turned his head to look directly at Ashkar. You have dishonored yourself, Ashkar Sutek, the old Minotaur rasped evenly. In the eyes of the spirits and the gods of our homelands, and the eyes of your son's god, you are no longer a tribe to him. Begone from here, Ashkar Sutek. Ashkar used one hand to rub at his temple, right next to his right horn, and reached for one last appeal, directly to Titus. Titus, please. I know I've been a bastard. Believe me, I do. You're angry right now, and I get that. But are you really going to turn your back on your own father? Titus slowly stepped around the coffee table, stalking toward Ashkar, until he loomed at his full height over him, standing mere inches away, staring down. You are indeed my father. But that man, he said, pointing back to John Jacobson, he raised me. He loved me. He did right by me. He earned the title of Dad. Titus took a full step backwards, hands balled into tight fists at his sides. Ashkar waited a moment, expecting someone to say something more, but he was met only with stony silence. When he stepped out onto the porch of the Jacobson house, he heard the deadbolt slap into place behind him. He never did get to hear Titus's announcement, which the young Minotaur made some 10 minutes later to the glowing approval of his family, his friends, and the young woman he loved. All in all, no smaller gathering of people could have provided more pride in one young man's decision. Chapter 18. 9 months later. Highmark Stadium, Orchard Park, New York. Summer still had some unfinished business with the denizens of Western New York as the opening home game of the Buffalo Bills drew ever closer to kickoff time. For the first weekend in September, it was somewhat unusual to see that not a single windbreaker or autumn jacket, let alone a hooded sweatshirt bearing the hometown team's colors and logo, was in evidence among the crowd seething and swarming among the quickly filling seats of the stadium. John and Linda Jacobson spotted Chona and his usual companions as the Minotaurs waved them down, pointing to their seats a few rows up from the front, right near the 50-yard line. "Hail and well met, Jonathan and Linda Jacobson," Chona exclaimed over the hurly-burly of the other fans around their section. "This is much different than being at one of Titus's college games." "That it is," Linda said, taking her seat next to Chona, her husband on her left. She quickly reached over and put her hand on the big shaman's, patting it as she said, "Again, I'm so sorry to hear about your father." Chona closed his eyes a moment, then nodded. "In the end, he was at peace, Linda. His mantle is now my own, and I will live up to his example, I pray. I thank you for the comfort." He looked over to John then, leaning slightly forward. "Jonathan, I trust you are well." "Doing good, yeah. Busy, though. We got a lot of jobs coming up with PS 188. They need a lot of work on their older restrooms. Half the pipes have gone to rot over the years. It's enough that I'm either going to have to bring on a part-timer or get my own hands dirty again. Not that I mind." "It is good for a man to continue to have purpose, to practice his trade," said Chona. "Ah, I believe I see the Turkins coming." John and Linda turned and waved down the elven illusionist and his wife Rita, who made their way with bumps and apologies through several seated spectators to join the Jacobsons and the clutch of Minotaurs who had accompanied Chona to the game. Hugs and handshakes were lovingly exchanged among them all, and they got seated right in front of the Jacobsons. Linda leaned forward and asked, "Didn't Misha ride with you two?" She did," said Tarion, "but she made some arrangements to meet Titus before the game by the players' tunnel." The public address system speakers buzzed around the stadium, and the crowd, recognizing the cues, started hooting and hollering, jumping up and down out of their seats. Ask anyone familiar with the Bills fan base. This was the Bills Mafia getting geared up. "Ladies and gentlemen, the National Football League proudly welcomes you to its first week of regulation season play," called one of the announcers in the broadcast booth. "Now please, welcome your hometown team, the Buffalo Bills." The crowd roared, and John and Linda Jacobson stood proudly, beaming down at their son. Titus stood proudly in his uniform on the sideline area, hands on his hips, looking up into the stands. One of his colleagues came over and tapped him on the shoulder. "It's a great gig being here," the Hume said, also looking up into the crowd. "And trust me, you never forget your first league game." "I imagine not," the Minotaur replied with a nod. "Yeah, anyway, there's a half-elf woman over there at the end of the players' tunnel. Says she's your wife, Sergeant," the patrolman added. Titus looked over, his officer's dress uniform crisp for his first Buffalo Police Department game day supplemental security detail. The stripes on his sleeves were only a couple of months old, but the accelerated program at ECC's New York State Police Academy had proven good on its promise of securing him early candidacy for promotion. Looking over at the tunnel to the locker rooms, he saw Misha standing there, in a lovely light gray sundress, her hands clasped behind her back, swaying back and forth as she flashed him a smile. "Yeah, that'd be her, Benny. I'll be right back," Titus said, jogging over to the half-elf illusionist. He leaned down to give her a quick kiss, and she brought a small Igloo brand lunch bag out from behind her back for him. "Oh, hey, thanks, hon." "I figured you'd forget. So excited for your first big game here and all," she said. She scooched in to stand under his extended arm, and they stood together like that, looking out over the field as the Jets lined up to kick off to their divisional rival. The ball sailed through the air, and the NFL season was officially underway. "Do you think you'll miss it?" Titus gave her a light squeeze. "Maybe." He gently kissed her forehead. "But I would have missed this more." Thus concludes American Minotaur. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to this tale. I have greatly enjoyed sharing it with you, as I enjoyed writing it to begin with. This is Joshua T. Culkin's trilogy, also known as Byron Acidius, saying, remember, keep reading.